We've got a few other people who've joined online. Just a reminder, if you do join in at some point, I'll ask you to introduce yourselves. And can we go round the room, just for those people who can't see who's on camera, because we don't have our name under the picture. So I'm Matthew Barber, Police and Crime Commissioner.
And Kirsty Sumner, Admin Support Officer.
Gillian Ormston, Chief Exec.
Tim Saunders, Head of Financial Planning and Analysis.
She's Butler, Head of Service Improvement.
Sorry, Ali Nichols, Head of Strategic Governance.
Lovely, thank you. And apologies, we've got apologies from Martin Thornley, my CFO, Linda, who is your CFO, Jason, and any other apologies? That was it. Okay, good stuff. Right. Let's go through the actions from the previous meeting. Right slide. We have a couple just still due to be actioned. One is on the local authorities understanding the accuracy of council tax forecasting. That was with Martin and Linda. We may not
an update through on Friday.
Excellent. That's right. If we've got an update,
Yeah, I think it was South and Vale that were highlighted as key areas of concern. Yes.
fine. Okay, that's helpful. That's just so that we can get better forecasting for our council tax figures for future budgets. But I'll follow that one up with Martin separately. Then we've got that. Matty, I think you were going to be updating some figures on statutory time limits.
That's in the performance pack.
Fantastic. And I think most of the other ongoing ones are as well. So we've got statutory time limits data to come back in 12 months. That's obviously not happened yet. And then the hotspot patrols and Project Cornerstone, they're both in the
So the Cornerstone has been sent Gillian an update ahead of the meeting. It's been given to Mark Tarbutt, who's leading that for the force, and then I believe he's linking with Rachel Gilbert. So that's all I know on that one, but I know Mark's owning that. In terms of the hotspots, I can give an update on that today. And then the last one there, the one that is completed at the bottom, I've shared the feedback that I've been given to HMIC on the tiering system to Gillian. Very happy to talk about that in brief terms if you'd like, because we've now had the public presentation of that result. So.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. We'll leave that for the action for now. We will move on to item 3, which is KPIs and scrutiny areas. This one's for you, Jason, but I imagine you might pass most of it on to Matty. So unless you want to say it by introduction.
No, Matty's going to present this one.
Yeah,
Okay.
Very happy to take these, Matthew. So on the first point, I very competently said to Kirsty ahead of the meeting, well, I won't put anything on screen for the MSS because it's not been made public, and then between that update today, it's been made public. So the new MSF groups have been made public. For those who don't know, MSF stands for Most Similar Forces. I don't propose putting anything on screen today, really, because my brief was to give an update in layman's terms, and there are people around the table that have had my presentation on this already, and there are lots of things that probably don't fall into the category of layman's terms in there. The way in which the Home Office have gotten to the new Most Similar Forces groups is quite complicated, but in essence, what they are trying to do is provide smaller groups of police forces in the country against which they can compare each individual force. So each individual force is within a group of 7 other forces, and we have always had this. Well, we've had this for a long time, but it just refreshed the methodology. So what that means in practice for TVP is that up until only about a week ago, publicly, our Most Similar Forces were Somerset, Cambridgeshire, Hampshire, Hertfordshire, Essex, Leicestershire, and Sussex. Post the new methodology and a change to the groupings, we have retained Avon and Somerset, Cambridgeshire, Hampshire, and Herts, but we have lost Essex, Leicestershire, and Sussex, and instead we are in a similar group with Bedfordshire, Surrey, and Wiltshire. The methodology that the Home Office have used, and the one that they published on their website, suggests that the purest way of using these Most Similar Forces is to look at weighted crime demand profile. So that's a valid thing for it to be used for. Outside of that, the validity of how they've calculated those groups essentially starts to decrease. And I think that's a really important thing for us just to understand as police forces and be very aware of, that you can't apply those groups to every single data point we'll be talking about in terms of police performance. It doesn't give you a sensible comparison necessarily. So that's just one that we ought to be very alive to as a force and informed about. Thames Valley Police also sits as a slight outlier within the whole process because we are a very large force, and because of the particular things that they've used to feed through into that grouping decision. We are already an outlier within our grouping. So they give a similarity score for each group of forces, and our similarity score to the forces around us in that group is quite low in comparison to others. So things for us to be aware of, but I've worked through all of the vagaries of that in force, given that presentation to the BCC's office, given it a force liaison at Chief Officer Group as well. Feels like the presentation that has legs. I think that's it now. I don't think anybody else is asking me to do it, but it's there and we understand the benefit. I think the interesting thing will be how those most similar groups are used in the performance framework. And that's something I'm keeping a watchful eye on with HMIC and with the Home Office as I'm talking.
So I think, thank you for that. In the previous presentation, you said quite a complex area. And I think realistically, and if I were to I think Mark Twain lies down lies and statistics, the risk is that we could argue that the new MSF is imperfect, but you could also argue the previous MSF was imperfect and there was probably no perfect solution. So whilst we collectively in Thames Valley might say we don't like it very much for X, Y, Z reasons, there's probably not a perfect solution we should be pushing people towards per se, but there are particular characteristics of this setup which may present some challenges for TVP in the future. Yeah. So I think for me, and we did touch on this previously, but I'm not sure we've actually yet. So to capture as an action for today is if you can provide that sort of one-page summary of the foreseeable challenges that this might present, because I think it's worth us making that case to the Home Office publicly now and to HMIC in terms of that sort of forced tiering system, so that if in 2 years' time we're crying foul over some statistical anomaly, it doesn't look like we're just making it up at the time because we don't like it. We've highlighted that what the challenges are early on.
Matthew, I think there's also a bit for us to work through internally about the holding to account and how we use those most similar forces in that aspect as well. So what we wouldn't want to do is be setting up to fail against, because we're going to be an outlier, I think, in a number of areas, and it's how do we use that internally as well as the HMIC stuff.
It's a good note to make, Graham, to put that one page together. I think my advice at present would be to not use them for our understanding of our force performance. That is, looking at crime rates, I think that's legitimate. We can have a look at those. There are some crime rates that doesn't work as well for, but that's set out in the technical advisory paper that came alongside it. But I think articulating where we are against the 43 forces is absolutely valid, because you can anchor yourself against the whole profile of policing in the country, understand the differences between, using that grouping for something like outcome performance as an example. Probability is fairly low, so I would suggest in force we use the wider force profile to understand where we are against 43, and then we can react to the political and inspectorate approach to how we use them.
Thank you. Jason, anything else you want to add on that before we move on?
I mean, the key issue which Matty has mentioned is how they are used. I mean, it is quite a complicated, if you like, an algorithm or approach to this. So we are going to be on the detail, if that makes sense. If HMIC start to make assumptions on this which are not bound or in line with the data that we have, we will gently push back against that. But it is a change, as you said. There's no perfect system, but I'm not sure this is in any way more accurate than what was there before. So, but we have no, it's what they've decided in the Home Office, and we'll do our best to provide the data. And if there are reasonable assumptions we can make from the data, obviously we'll take that on board.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Our next item is the VORG and domestic abuse update.
Yeah, so this is contained within the performance pack itself. So I don't know whether you want to wait until I get into the kind of that summary, because I can then touch on that in detail with those slides if you're happy.
Yeah, that's fine. We can do that within the pack. Opdeter.
Yeah, so Opdeter, there are two strands of Opdeter. One is when it's applied for routines, youth diversionary schemes, and that the PCC's office have kind of the main profile within and oversee that work. The other is in adults. So I reached out to a number of different places in the force for this because there's a kind of two balances to this. Opdeter is the essentially covers the strategies within which we undertake our approach to knife possession and knife-enabled crime. The profile of our knife possession and knife-enabled crime figures and our outcomes against those is something that we track in Force PG. You'll see it in the performance pack, so I'll touch a little bit on what that has looked like for our knife-enabled crime when we get there. In terms of how it's run by the adult scheme, there was already a assessment made of our approach to Opdeter by, I think it was the Cambridge Evidence-Based Policing Centre, and one of the key issues that they found was it was very difficult to articulate from the data that was captured where a certain activity or tactic was used and what that then led to. What they could articulate is the success of our reduction in knife crime and knife-enabled crime, and you'll see that through the performance pack. That's been very strong for us. But trying to anchor the causational link between exactly which tactics within Opdeter, that's proved far more difficult. In terms of the feedback from frontline and from the approach of using Opdeter, that's been a very live and focused thing in force, and it's very much BAU. Speaking with John Batty, he's been approached by the Home Office for our approach to that, and because our knife-enabled crime figures are so low. So in terms of that side of things, there's good confidence, but drawing data out of exactly which tactic is then causational to that lowering of our crime profile is more challenging, which is where we really sit on it. That said, we've seen 7% reduction in possession of bladed article offences in force in this early part of this year, so year to date this year, which is good to see. Our knife-enabled crime has risen slightly this year, and I'll come on to that when we get into the performance pack, so just slightly profile. I think that's it in terms of the Opdeter side of things, Matthew, unless you've got any other questions for me.
So, I mean, the only question really I'll pose to Jason, but may come back to you. So I absolutely take the point about the statistical challenges around individual cases now and identifying causation to those. I think that is entirely fair. And they sit within a wider suite of tactics and some very good evidence in terms of reductions in Thames Valley. I think for me, and Jason, that you were dead at the time when we were doing all of the Opdeter stuff and had some of those challenging conversations about process within the force. The real issue for me was about mitigating the risk and the fact that we had some individuals prior to this who were simply being IUI'd or even NFA'd for what the public would consider to be quite serious offences. When there was an opportunity to have some sort of custodial restraint on that person, whether that just be remanded in police custody or a greater chance of getting them remanded through the courts. I guess the reassurance I would want is that those processes are still understood and in place, and that that approach still remains within TVP, that subject to the usual constraints of custody and all those rules that apply, that actually we are still taking that approach of saying, when you've got someone, they're over 18, they're carrying a knife, we are seeking charge and remand for those cases straight away. Is that still you provide the reassurance that's still the approach being taken?
Yes, very, very much so, Matthew. I think we have got. It's one of the things even though we know we're in a really good place around knife crime, in kind of the national rankings, it continues to be on area of focus on force performance, and probably always will, because it's a really important area. So, Matthew's mentioned we have a few extra knife crime offences which he'll cover in the performance pack, tiny number. but we continually monitor it and comply and what works. And just covering that point which Matty made around that independent review couldn't work out which tactic as part of deter was better than another. I'm not sure how necessarily relevant that is. I mean, it's very often, isn't it, where we try to fix a problem and we try lots of things, and it's like a suite of, you know, of a response. And if that works, that's great. Even though we're not clear exactly which of the tactics are having the most effect, doing everything we're doing around deters continues to be effective. We regularly sharing good practice with other forces as well, who obviously have much higher rates of knife crime than Thames Valley.
No, agreed. That's helpful. Thank you. In which case, Matthew, I'll let you move on the rest of the performance pack highlights, and then we'll move through the rest of the agenda. We'll take items 5 or 6 after the performance pack, because that will give the opportunity for you to part your next meeting.
Okay, so I'm happy to share my screen in this way if I can manage to do it. Just
Let me know if you can't, and I'll do.
just trying to, so let's see what happens with that.
Okay. I think Kirsty, you're ahead of me.
Can we see that? Is that okay?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Is that
Is that
definitely
the
the
public
public version?
Yes. So
There
this
was
is
one slide removed. I think the public agenda I've got only 52 slides on 50.
this is from the agenda that is attached to the meeting.
That's the TVP only version.
Okay.
Do you want me to share the
Why don't you
public
share?
version?
Why don't you share that one then? In that case.
I think they just removed.
While we're doing that, Matty, given that we are doing the public meeting, do you want to explain what's been removed from the pack? Those who will be now desperate to see what is on slide 53.
Yes. So the only things in essence, the pack that we share in this meeting is exactly the same performance pack that we use in force for our force performance meeting. That runs once a month. And actually the things that we need to remove from this pack are very, very minimal. The only reason we would do so is if the data is not publicly available.
Yeah.
So there are some areas in force that we compare ourselves against other forces in terms of some data. That is not necessarily publicly available data, and we do not have the authority to share other force information. So that would be why something's removed from the package. Yeah.
Thank you.
When you want to move through.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Kirsty. So if you stay on that slide a little, so we put a RAG status against each of our aims under our 4 pillars at the beginning of each month, and then we also put a trajectory against each. These fair to say that we started off this year in a really positive space for most of our aims. Even those in red, they will be in red because we are right at the start of the year. We want to make improvements, and some of those will take time to build through the year. However, our performance at the early start part of this year, and you'll see it articulated on some of the slides, has been much stronger than we have been able to achieve in the early parts of previous years. Typically, it's been very difficult for us to gain huge amounts of traction in the early months, and that's then made life slightly difficult to gain that performance and improve things as you move through further in the year. But we've really started off strongly in some of these areas. So I'll come to some relevant slides, and Kirsty, you have to just bear with me because it's quite a long pack, so I don't intend on touching on every slide.
Can I just go back up to that?
Of course, yeah.
That one for a moment, and I won't stop on every slide, I promise. But it's really again for the sort of public understanding.
Yes.
You've got 3 that are red, which are static, so they're not actually getting worse, but they are static.
Yeah.
How do you differentiate from those that are orange and static?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So the RAG status, the red, amber, green colours, is defined on how close or far away we are from the aims that we have set for our full year performance. The trajectory is based on where we have moved since the last month, because this pack is designed to operate on a monthly rhythm within our force performance group. And so if we have improved in those areas since last month, you may well see something that stays red because we've not hit our aim that we want to get to for the whole of the year. However, you might see improving against that trajectory. If our performance is relatively stable and the same as it was last month, then you'll see static. And if it's regressing, then you'll see regressing there. So that's the differentiator between those two things. And it helps our monthly performance rhythm and senior leaders in those areas get a feel for not only how we're doing against our total aims, but where does the more recent performance feel like we are tracking.
So members of the public might question the fact that there are so many statics against particularly the ambers, because that feels quite middle of the road static. What is being done to try and improve those areas?
Yeah, so I mean, I'll take the point around there being a lot of statics first and what's being done second. In terms of the static, I don't know Jason's view. I would define myself as a fairly harsh marker. My intent is to try and improve performance in the force, and that's always where I am driving. If I've seen a marked shift and a marked difference month on month, then I will put it to improving. However, there are some elements within the year. If you look at something like improved retention figures month on month are very rarely going to move so significantly that you could make a fairly reasonable claim as to that longer term direction of travel. That's something that does just take longer to articulate through. And then there are other periods of performance that actually achieving static is a very good thing. It depends on what the last month's performance is like. So if you were performing incredibly strongly last month and you hit static again, I might be delighted about that performance group this month. However, if we were at a fairly low level for the previous month and we were static, it's a different conversation. So the importance about this whole pack is that it's aiming to get us into a place where we're really focusing on the things we want to improve, but also it's got the context and the detail in it that we can understand our performance to that level, so we understand where we need to put our effort. And that second part, I suppose, answers the question around how we drive that improvement. There may be areas in here that static I'm comfortable with for the time being. There were other areas that I absolutely wouldn't be, and we will have those conversations based on what the performance looks like in the group.
Is there a way of highlighting that on this overview page, the areas that are static and you're comfortable with them being static in the area? Because it just feels as if it's all the same at the moment and it would be interesting to see that.
So it's an interesting question. I suppose the purpose of this page is to give a feel and a flavour for where we are. It is not designed to be a standalone document. Were it to be, I think it would be totally valid to add more context, more detail, potentially a description against what performance has been like against each of those aims. The pack in and of itself is geared to do exactly that. So that's why we gear it in that. I mean, from a chief officer point of view, I pre-briefed the deputy chief constable ahead of each performance group using the pack, and we always collectively decide on those areas that we are going to have as focuses, the areas that we're comfortable with, and that's how we always start the meeting, understanding. So I think the danger of putting a huge amount of nuance on this slide is that you lose the ability to get to the detail as you move through the pack, which is how it's designed. Well, essentially saying.
Can I just come in this point? Apologies, I can't put my hand up on some reason on this feature of Teams. I think there's a couple of points which Matty has made. One, firstly, we are, and I've worked in a few forces, and TVP is very hard on itself in terms of standards of expectation. So you could easily rewrite that first chart and put lots more greens on there. But we specifically are not prepared to put something green unless we have got demonstrative improvements which is sustained. A couple of months of doing well is not enough. And at the start of the year, you would expect ambers and greens. Sorry, ambers and reds. If it's green at the start of the year, we are not focused on the areas that we need to improve upon, or we're not setting our expectations high enough, if that makes sense. So I don't think we should be concerned by the reds and ambers. Now, an obvious example would be the improving response times. And Matty is being very hard on us, I think, on this. We are shown as red and static. At the end of the year, so January to March, with the course of the year, our response times were getting better and better and better. And I think the last 3 months of the year, and we've continued, we've hit our 70% target for the first time since I've been in TVP, I think. Matty, is that right?
That's right. We're above 70% for
yeah.
very long.
So our response times are better than they have been in the last 10 years today, right? But we're still shown as red. Why is that? Because I've set a target for this year. I want another 10% added to that, which is really, really hard and really ambitious and stretching. But that's why we read, even though today our response times are better than they have last year and last year and last year. Does that help, if that makes sense? Even though it looks red, the context behind that is very different. What the red says is this year we need to do a lot more work in this space and a lot more to get to the target which I've set for the force.
Okay, that's good. Thank you. Right, we'll let you make a bit of progress on the fact.
Sure. Thanks. Thanks, Kirsty. Do you mind just putting it back on the main display, and then I can track through? Thank you. That's great. These first slides focus on our workforce. I won't dwell on it too much, other than to say that we are tracking really positively in this space. So our resignation profile is down. Our attrition volumes are down. This is an area that we've had a challenge with against other forces in the country. We've got a very good track record of keeping people in TVP, and so our retirement rate is among the best in the country. We keep people, they like working for us, and where they're doing a brilliant job, they like to stay on, which is great. But our resignation rate is a bigger challenge. There are some demographic, geographic issues with that. Our force is always at risk of that to a higher extent than some other forces will be, just by virtue of the forces that are around us. However, really positive track on this. Kat Mackay, who heads up workforce planning, has done a huge amount of work with my team, and our comprehension around this and the proactive work we're doing is seeing us bear fruit on this front, which is good to see. We move to the next slide. This is our sickness profile, which we monitor very regularly. We had an increase in the winter months. You can see towards the end of that chart that has started to come down again now. So you'll see there that in May we've seen a reduction on April, and similarly from March in terms of the number of sickness incidents we are having per 100 officers and staff on force. Really seasonal. Nothing to highlight of concern. Staff disruptions. I think we are among the best forces in the country for understanding our neighbourhood officers' time and where they are spending their time, and what abstractions can look like. You see it's gone up slightly to 2%. Just caution here, we're moving from 1% to 2%, so this is still fairly low in terms of unplanned distractions. A large-scale incident in force was behind some of that rise of 2%. However, this does rely on some manual input by officers, and one thing that my team has found is that there have been some errors of officers putting in the wrong start and end date for their abstractions. So we've got a couple of officers that were abstracted for 300 hours in one go. And I can reassure you that as challenging as some of our shift patterns are, we are not asking officers to work 300 hours in a stretch. So there is something within that 2% that we are now articulating back out of that recording, because there are some clear errors. So raise that in force performance group this month. That list is going to all LCU commanders, so they can sense check those longer term abstractions and just correct the recording, which will bring that back in line with what we expect. So nothing.
I think that does fit with conversations I've had, that people are finding it much better than 2-3 years ago, but starting to feel that there's a bit more pressure perhaps. And I think you're right, the critical instance everybody sort of understands, and you can't mitigate against anyway. But it's the ICR code and the Sea Watch, and the risk of a drift back to the position where we were previously, with more and more resource being put into neighbourhood, which is very good. But as Home Office limit some of the resourcing that we can put elsewhere, there's a risk we end up with people with a neighbourhood badge on. Not we get to put the badge in it. They're badged as neighbourhood, but they end up doing more and more of other things. It's a risk.
And it's a really interesting balance in terms of how we use our officers and what we use them for. What I would say is that and you'll see it less in this pack. You may well see it in the next panel meeting. We've had an intense period of demand. Last month, That's continued slightly into this month. The heat waves, the World Cup, those things drive, and we are not alone in that. Forces across the country are seeing their 999 level increase dramatically. That I think is probably part of that pressure that you are hearing being fed back, Matthew. And then for us, it's about trying to find that balance, and all forces are trying to find this with, if you are needing to distract your neighbourhood officers, can you distract them in a way that they're still serving their neighbourhoods and they're doing work that is serving that profile? For example, can they respond to incidents within their neighbourhood? That feels like a very simple thing for neighbourhood officers to be doing. So it's about trying to find that balance, but it is a balance.
But it also, when Jason, you and I have had this conversation, without being too prescriptive, because ultimately you need to deal with the demand that's coming in. I agree. I think the public would expect neighbourhood officers to be able to respond to those incidents in their communities. If you've got a shoplifting on a co-op and you've got a neighbourhood officer who's available to attend, that's exactly the sort of stuff they should be doing. However, picking up a load of volume of domestic abuse because it's in their geographical patch is probably not within their specialism, but also is going to actually withdraw them from the more public-facing roles so there's a little bit of that crime type potentially to put in there. Just so I'm understanding the numbers and that make sure we're sort of properly counting stuff. So this is described as unplanned abstractions.
Yes.
So if we went back to where we were 2-3 years ago, where neighbourhood were having, there was a strategy of saying response is under resourced. People are going to be moved to response for 3-month periods at a time. That presumably would count as a planned abstraction because it's part of that strategy. So whilst I'm comfortable with these figures, and I know there isn't an approach of large scale planned abstractions, but I'm just trying to make sure we're counting the right thing so that this is, your sergeant comes in this morning and says, actually, for this shift, you're now doing that.
Yeah.
That's fine. That's the bit we need to manage. But what I wouldn't want us to do is to find actually there's a whole other category of stuff where people are actually now moved for 2 or 3 months at a time. Won't show these figures because it's planned.
Just to jump in, I think this is an area that probably Rachel, it would be worthwhile just having a conversation with Rachel and helping her to understand from the performance monitoring, because the planned abstractions was something that was in my mind. And you've already said, Matty, that you're doing things to make sure the planned abstractions are not removing people where possible from the geographical area. But I think it's an area of interest to the PCC and worth us having a bit deeper dive into.
Yeah, so Rachel will already have access to the SIPO. So in the service agreement portal, you have your unplanned abstractions, your neighbour profile. You also have your planned abstractions, and that goes more broadly than just neighbour teams. So you can see those mascots, running festival, those things that we plan for as a natural course of the rhythm of the year. Those things are all articulated and we have recorded as well, so you can see where those officers are going and where they're not going. The other thing I'd say about the importance of this unplanned profile is the clarity of definition and guidance that neighbourhood officers are given about when to record in this space and when to record when they've been abstracted for a planned operation, and that's a known element. John Batty, I know, is always very keen on reinforcing the clarity of that guidance, and it's there on the app for them when they are recording abstractions. So I know John's got a very strong hand on that.
Can we actually, from Rachel Gilbert, to have a look into that, and I'll brief her.
Thanks, back to you.
Okay, thanks, Kirsty. So you can move us down. Victim satisfaction. I think I've spoken about this in Pams previously. We survey victims at 4 different touch points. When they first call through to us, when we send an officer, if that is the response that's required, when we triage their crime, if it goes through the AIU, and then further on down the investigation route. This we profile out in more detail on a rolling basis through Force Performance Group. If you go to the next slide, Kirsty, you can see there that investigations, 58%. It's remained fairly stable in terms of that satisfaction level. We had a detailed conversation about this in the last Force Performance Group, because we were also talking in detail about investigation quality and where you see the real kind of key things that we are in control of with investigations. The things that victims are most unhappy about is when they don't get a positive outcome for their investigation. I think we could all understand that. And there is a healthy amount of that that's within our gift as a police force, and there's some of that that's not within our gift. Not every investigation can lead to a positive outcome for a victim if the evidence and the lines of inquiry just aren't present. However, there are things in there that do affect that score as well, with things like quality and frequency of contact throughout the investigation. That's something that's definitely within our gift, and that's something that we focus on very much in the Force Performance Group. So we had quite a detailed conversation this month on that front, and you can see where the officers are performing really well in that space, contacting victims on a regular basis. You get much better satisfaction from victims, regardless of the outcome of their case, than you do where we can see that dropping off again. So we keep a watchful eye on that.
Can you just scroll back up for a moment? The three reds there, time waited for
Yes.
officer arrival, taken seriously and felt reassured.
Yeah.
What's happening in those spaces to improve those scores?
So I think that you've
What's that?
got to be aware of what percentages you're looking at there. So 87% of people feel taken seriously. 87% felt reassured. I think it's 83% were satisfied with the wait
This is
time.
just the
That
top,
looks
the top
quite
three,
different.
so
So
the top three and the
You-
bottom three. So there will
it's
always
exactly
be a
that.
bottom
So there'll
three.
always be a bottom
Yeah.
three, but you can see there that our satisfaction with officer attendance is 83%, which
Yeah.
is very, very strong.
Yeah.
And those bottom three are there by virtue of being the bottom three things that are responded to.
And I think
However,
to the uninitiated,
Very strong.
it could read 83, 87% didn't feel taken seriously, if you
Sure,
see what I mean.
yeah,
So it might be
yeah.
worth just a little note
very happy to
somewhere
provide
on that.
an explanatory note, because again, this is everybody in the
It's
Force
good to
Performance
get the
curriculum
clarity,
understands this. And again,
Yeah.
it's a profile you can get at through our social improvement portal.
but it's for the public.
For the public view, we can add an explanatory note to that
perfect.
just to give reassurance. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you.
Can I just come in that point? And because of that, if we had the resources, I would like us to attend every single victim of crime, because we know that when we do, the officers provide a good job, and that touch point, improving trust and confidence, is really important. Unfortunately, just because of other demands, I'm not sure if you're covering kind of summer demand at any point on this. Probably not, Matty, because it's kind of backward looking at 3 months. But we can't do that at the moment, which is why if those calls or crimes that we take over the phone or not sending an officer don't get the same level of satisfaction when we actually do, which is a challenge for us.
Yeah, that's very good point. Thanks, Kirsty. If you move through, if you pause on this. So this is our call handling performance. We've been in a really strong place with this for a long time. This is one of only 2 numerically defined targets the government has set in the new policing performance framework. They expect forces to answer 90% of 999 calls within 10 seconds. We have been well within that performance for a very long time. Matthew, you'll remember, you can see on the far left of that chart, we were not in that space 2 years ago. It was a challenging time for us in the contact centres, and through better resourcing, better staffing, technology, innovation, we've moved into a really strong space. So our performance is excellent. One thing I will say is that you won't see it articulated in this PAM, you may well in the next, is that the demand that we've been seeing over the last couple of months has been extreme, and that's presented a significant challenge for us in that space. And the sickness profile within our contact centres has also been challenging for us. So I'm expecting a tough couple of months in that space, and we need to make sure that we're on top of that. We got good reassurance from James Sullivan, who is superintendent in contact management for us now. He's running regular sickness silver meetings to make sure that they're keeping on top of that profile. So it's one that we understand very well. We performed brilliantly in for a long time. We will struggle if you have such peaks in demand, as Jason just mentioned, to keep at that level of service. So that's one that we're keeping a watchful eye on for next.
And just to put that in context, during the hot weather, the call demand and instant demand has been similar to New Year's Eve, which is our busiest day of the year. And because of the hot weather is over a number of weeks, the contact centres are running red hot in terms of the demand coming through the door. Like I said, we have had some quite significant sickness in there, which is making it more difficult, and that bleeds into the previous discussion about neighbourhood abstractions as well. Because demand is so high because of the warm weather, we're having to abstract neighbourhood officers more than we would like, if that makes sense. But it's a whole force response to deal with it, and it's a national issue as well. When it is hot, sadly, more people call the police for assistance.
And of course, we're just at the start of school holidays as well, which puts more pressure on our thing within TVP, but also means you've got more things going on, more antisocial behaviour, all those things which will generate more demand, unfortunately.
Yeah, and just to give some numeric context to the challenge that James was talking about there, the first 3 months of this year, we've had 12,000 more 999 calls than we did in the first 3 months of last year. So to kind of put that into the broad context of our full demand, at this point last year, we had 92,909 calls. This point this year, it's 106. So it's a really significant change in our demand on the 999s. Thanks, Kirsty. So our instant response times, I will whiz through a couple of slides because it's kind of a collective context, and I'm very happy to swing back to any slide that you may have questions about. So Jason said that I'm a little bit of a harsh taskmaster on this side of things. I think that's probably fair. Getting over 70% of grade 1 calls attended within 20 minutes for TVP for a long time was a significant challenge for us. However, we are there and we've been there consistently. The reason that you see red on these dials there is, as Jason prefaced at the top of the meeting, we have set our aim at 80%. This is in response to our desire to improve in this area always. However, the reason that we've set such a stringent target this year is because the target that the Home Office has set in the police white paper is 90% for grade 1 incidents attended within 15 minutes in an urban area and 20 minutes in a rural area. That is incredibly stretching. The vast majority of forces across the country are meeting that. And so we took the informed decision in TVP to make sure we built on really strong improvement in performance in response, as Jason's already mentioned, in a way that is staged, and we can apply ourselves to aim for stringent targets, building towards that national expectation that keeps our officers in the right spaces. Matthew, to your point around the neighbourhood profile and ICR, but also keeps the force engaged in improving in this space as well. So it's definitely a challenge for us in this space, but we've been ambitious in where we set our aims this year. And we started off the year fairly well, more to do always. But if you look at the comparison to previous year, little column of 3 figures there, you can see there that we've attended over 1,000 more incidents within our agreed SLAs than we did last year. So a good start to the year, for work to be done as we move through, and it's a stringent target for us.
And the other thing I think on that, Matty, it's fair to say is if we compare ourselves with some of the forces, a couple of other forces might look a little bit better than us, but they actually manage, they monitor this target differently, if that makes sense. And there's a lot of work. We got a letter this morning, didn't we, Matty, around the Home Office trying to really define effectively when the clock starts and when the clock ends. The good news in TVP, we've done a load of work on this already, and we are characteristically harsh on ourselves. So whatever the national target is, we'll already be compliant in the way that we're doing it, or in fact it might even be easier for us, if that makes sense, depending on how they're pulling this together, if that makes sense. Some forces that you're in a queue waiting with a message, some crime prevention advice, and they're not starting the until you've spoken to somebody, and we are much more strict in terms of when the call comes in and actually when we get there.
Yeah, even that, noting the improved 101 response, which admittedly is unlikely to carry a huge number of grade 1s. But even if you're within the target and you're only waiting a minute, that's another minute off of your 20 minutes, if you don't count that wait time, which other forces won't be doing. So, and it's a really important point. And the letter we got this morning from the MCC around this was a kind of a steer to forces to please try not to make too many sweeping changes to the approach you take to responding to incidents, because nationally they are trying to work out one of those definitions that Jason just mentioned. When you start the clock, when you stop the clock.
And just on this, as Matty said, great performance, end of the performance year. We've maintained that performance, but actually attending an extra 1,000, did you say?
Yeah.
So demand is going up, but we're still maintaining performance. And I got a deep dive briefing on this last year. I mean, 80% this year is going to be really hard, but we might get there. I mean, there's some quite innovative stuff. Great example, Matthew. We're starting to trial drone as a first responder So sending drones to some of these jobs rather than get there quicker. When there's a fight in the street, for example, we get a drone up straight away within a couple of minutes. If it's all gone and everybody's there, we can downgrade the call, if that makes sense. So there's a lot of innovation in this space. We're working really, really hard to try to get that 80% this year.
Good, thank you.
So I'll touch briefly on the grade 2. We made a huge amount of improvement in how quickly we got to our grade 2 incidents last year. This was before that national stringent target in grade 1s, and so we knew that we wanted to improve our service to the public here, and we have done that really significantly. You can see there that we are now close to 70% of grade 2s attended within an hour, which is the timescale that we set for those calls graded at 2. I think it's fair to say that last year we were hoping to get 60%, so we outstripped that by a significant margin. My aim here is to maintain this level of service for the public whilst we try and attain that really ambitious target for grade 1s, and I'm very pleased that at the start of the year we've been able to do that. So it's one that we will keep monitoring, but a real improvement. You can see there on the chart on the left-hand side where we were and where we are today. So I'm pleased that's been able to be maintained in the face of that significant demand increase that we spoke about. This is our grade 3 and 3M profile. So the 3M and 3s are where we understand that there's a need for attendance. However, there's no urgent or immediate time pressure necessarily on that attendance. So we look to attend those jobs either within 72 hours and book an appointment with the victim, or 24 hours. And again, our performance in both is fairly robust. You'll see the green line just dipping down on the grade 3s. That's actually not reflective of our performance. That's a system problem with our appointment booking system, where it's not picking up appointments being booked. So that's with ICT to fix, and that will then come back to a rational place. This is ARU performance. So I touched on asking victims about their experience when they get triaged in terms of crime, and this is what that looks like. We've seen a dip off in the speed at which we're able to triage those crimes that come through this service. That has coincided directly with ARU 2.0 going live. So it's been a very significant change in how ARU is structured. We were expecting a performance dip at that point. Our challenge now is to make sure that we get that back as quickly as possible. So that's with Ed and Ed being the head of ARU to look at and to monitor, because it is challenging, and ARU triage timeliness is directly impacted by all of that demand spike that I've spoken about. This is prosecution time limits. So this is one of the actions earlier on in the meeting. You can see here that we are 5% down on the number of cases that we have recorded as exceeded prosecution time limits. And you can just see on the chart at the bottom there that we've started off below where we were 2 years ago, and we had quite a high number at the first month, April of last year. So we're below by 5% on where we were, which is really good to see. In terms of the proportion of our unfiled investigations where there is an active SLA, that's around 20% of our cases. So this is a big profile for us, where you have an SLA. But you can see there that we are tracking in a really good space. And if you look at the comparison of numbers there, you've got approximately 6,000 active statutory time limit cases, and we missed that statutory time limit in 43, maybe 34 in the first and 34 in May. So a very small portion actually get to that point where we miss those time limits. There are some cases which we would always miss those time limits. So there are some instances in where a crime will have a statutory time limit on it for us to investigate and then get that through to a point of charge, or where we get an outcome for. If it's not been reported to us within that time frame, there's nothing we can do to miss that profile. So there are profiles within that are code 17, which is the code we give to a case exceeding those prosecution time limits, is an absolutely valid thing to apply, which is why it exists. And then there are others where we are in control of that time limit and it's been reported in time, which is where we focus our efforts.
And of course, there's a grey area where you're reliant on a third party to do something in the meantime,
yes,
which they haven't done, which is not directly into his control. But there's a question about how much TPP have actually pushed for that. Those are the middle ones, I guess.
Yeah.
So those figures of 54 for May, reading that correctly, out of your 5,000 cases,
Yeah.
that will include those that are reported after. So
Yep.
yeah.
Okay. So there will be some in there that we would never be able to meet that time limit because of the reporting nature of them. The other thing that happens on a regular basis in Force Performance Group, this is a good example of some data that isn't in the public pack because we can't and we are not allowed to share it, is those cases that are currently ongoing that are reaching the point of that statutory time limit. So we monitor that very carefully, and we also have that available for every single officer. So as an officer in TVP, if you have an investigation caseload, and that's your role, on your screen that Service Group have built for you, you have all of your cases that have a statutory time limit there in front of you, and you can see how much time is left on those cases so that you can be progressing those at pace. So that's some of the practical work we do to make sure that keeping on.
Certainly, I mean, I've seen some of that work develop in recent months and years, and that certainly seems to be what's led to some of this improvement.
Yeah.
I am
Matt-
curious.
So go on, Jason.
Matty, can I just ask, one of the things I'm a little bit frustrated about with this data, and I do regularly speak to CPS about this, of those cases we're missing the target, which ones are in our gift to fix, if that makes sense? Because you're absolutely right. 6 months to get a case to court. If somebody reports that case to us, I don't know, after 5 months that it happened, and the digital devices to examine, and of course, these STL cases, by definition, they're the lowest threat, if that makes sense. The seriousness of the offence is going to be low, which is why there's a 6 month time scale to get them there. We're never going to get there. Is there a way of identifying which ones how good are we at making improvements, and which ones we simply can never get there?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, Jason. So at the really clear end of that, in terms of if a case is being reported to us and the statutory time limit is already passed, we articulate that out of our officers' profiles around those cases that they need to be on top of and making sure they are driving towards, because that is wasted effort on our officers' part. We need to be very clear with the victim about the profile of that case, but in terms of trying to drive that investigation, you are never going to be able to meet that time limit. So those we articulate already now, and you can see that profile in and out of SIPO and Tempo when you need to. Those cases, Jason, that fall in that grey area where you are relying on other things, digital devices, but also the interaction with CPS. So CPS are a crucial partner for us in this. They have to be doing their job to make sure these cases get to where they need to be. That's something we track really carefully in Force Performance Groups as well. So what we do is we don't just track when the time limit is hit, that kind of final deadline. We track how many cases we are able to get to CPS within a certain amount of time before that time limit hits, so that we are providing CPS with as much time as they can possibly need, and they can then have sensible conversations with us. So that profile is tracked within Force PG, but it's also tracked within the joint with CPS and attendance, so they track those cases as well, and we can hold each other to account for how well we are doing those. But it's a really good point, Jason. And to reassure you, what we are not doing in Force Performance Group at all is holding officers to account for cases that they were never in control of. Those are articulated out, and we focus on the ones that are within our
That was my curiosity, was what happened in May, June last year that led it to be so low, and was that something that TVP were doing, or was it something CPS was doing? And to help us to understand.
So the difficulty in a question like that, in terms of the answer back, when you're dealing with numbers that are so low, is that the truth of it will be in the nuance of each case. And some of it will be because we didn't have as many that were already past their time when we came in. Some of it will be the really proactive work we're doing to drive that better approach. The thing that I'm really keen on and I'm really geared for, and this goes a bit back to that RAG status, is where do we track through the year in this profile so that we are confident that the steps that we are taking, the information we give to officers, the scrutiny we apply, is making a meaningful and lasting difference. And I think that's where you can see my confidence will sit as we move through the whole year and we make sure that we're on the right track. So you can see actually here the RAG status for each slide that we talked about at the top is on the top right. It's that little red triangle. We have this in red. We are green. We are tracking really well. But to Jason's point, we need to make sure that we're tracking really well collectively and consistently through the year. And so that's where the balance comes.
Okay.
Thank you.
Right, so we're moving on to our outcome profile now, and some really good starts to the year here, as I mentioned earlier on in the meeting. We've set an aim for a solve rate of 16.5% for all crime, and we've hit that in the first 2 months of this year, which is really good to see. You can see the dark blue line is the volume of our solved crimes for the start of this year. You can see we've started in a much healthier position than we did in the last 2 years, which is excellent to see. Our charge rate, so within the solved rate, you have out of court disposals as well. Charge rate is just focusing on our charges. That we've set a quite ambitious aim of 9.5%. We're at 9.2%, so not quite where we want to be. However, over the course of our first couple of months in the last 3 years, we are in a much stronger position. So you can see there that through each of those years, we've tracked upwards as we've gone through the year, and our performance has got steadily better. If we continue that, which I hope that we will, we're starting from a much stronger baseline, and I've got confidence that we'll be able to meet that 9.5% by the end of the year. So I'm really encouraged by those. As starts the year, we've had a much stronger start than we've been able to in the previous few years. This is our out of court profile. So we also track the out of court rates. And you can see there that our out of court rate is above where we set our aim. So we want to get an out of court resolution rate of 7% this year. We're at 7.2% so far. And you can see there in terms of the resolutions there, we are again starting the year in a really strong position. That dark blue couple of points, which is really great. Knife crime. This is one where Jason's made the point that we have seen an uptick in the volume of knife crimes that we've seen this year. So I think some things to just pick out on this slide. It's in red, quite rightly, because we've seen an uptick in the volume. However, that 67% increase in knife crimes, if you need to just caution a bit of calm on that front, because we're dealing with such low numbers in Thames Valley Police on this front. You can see here that the numbers we're dealing with are under 100 per month. And when you deal with the scale of demand that we've spoken about with 106,000 calls coming into our 999 centres so far this year, we are dealing with very low crime numbers here. The other thing to note is the middle blue line, so the sort of royal blue line, that started down at 50 in April last year, was a significantly low period. We've been operating at a very low level of knife crime compared to other forces for a long time now. And you can see there in the top right chart where you can see the bars, we are absolutely in line with where we've been in 2023-24, 24-25. But the 25-26 start of last year was very low, and then it normalised a little further into the year. So that's what we're seeing in terms of that difference. And nationally, the Home Office has set an expectation that we are held to account against the profile that was in 2023 for the volume of knife crime. That's what all forces are being held to account for, because that represented a lower threshold of knife crime that we were seeing across the country. We have increased by 7 crimes when you compare us to that point in that year. And we've got very robust kind of governance around this, led by Emma Bailey and Force. So we are up. However, I'm confident that is a very comfortable position for us to be able to manage, and each area very aware of their knife crime profile.
And just to be clear, that definition by the Home Office excludes possession, doesn't it?
Yes, this is a really good point. Yes, this is knife-enabled crime, and what we mean by that is where a knife has been used in some way, or a threat of a knife has been used, rather than somebody, for example, being stopped and searched and they have a knife on their person. Serious organised crime, I won't touch on in too much detail. We track the number of disruptions we have against serious organised crime. We also have a much more detailed profile that comes into Force BG, which we had this month. Again, that is all straight into the covert world of policing, so that's something that needs to be held within Force. But our disruptions information can be public. The bars kind of dropping off as you get kind of closer to the right hand side of that chart. That's something that just takes time. So that normalizes it over time, because it takes quite a long time to score and then rationalize the disruptions we have. They have to go through a scoring system, which we're not totally controlling the timing around. So that's one thing that we monitor, but we give time in Force Performance Group to allow for the recording to happen. So yes, I won't say too much more on that. So we go into a bit more detail in Force PG. These purple slides focus on our outcome profile for VORG and DA. That was an action from last PAM, so we'll cover that here. We set an aim for an outcome rate of 11% in VORG. It's quite a stretching rate. We are at 10.1% so far this year. You can see there that, again, the dark blue 2 dots on the chart, we started off stronger than we did last year by quite a margin, so that's good to see. And what we need to see is that keeping on track. Solve rate for rape and other sexual offences, we set an aim of 12.5% in this space, and we are above that at 13.2%, which is really good to see. Much lower volumes in this space. The crime profiles are much lower than the large violence against women and girls profile, as you would imagine. But I'm again encouraged by the strong start we made in this year, and we are above where we were in the last 2 years, so above that rate. And if we move to the next slide, this covers the domestic abuse profile. Again, we set the aim for 11% for domestic abuse, which is quite a challenging aim, but we've set a good start to the year. As you can see there in the dark blue dots, we are above where we were in the last 2 years for the start of the year, which is good to see. And then down at the bottom are code 14 and 16. So what that is reflecting is where we are losing victim engagement in our cases, where a victim is declining to engage with us in the investigation space. So what we do is track the volume of that and the volume of cases where we don't have victim engagement through the year as well. It's sort of the offset the way we're getting a positive outcome and the victim is engaged in the process all the way through with us. And you can see there that we are seeing fewer people disengaging cases so far this year than we were last year. We're 135 down and 8 down in VORG and 8 down in domestic abuse. So that's one that we always track. There is a little bit of that same sort of profile as the SDL cases in there. There are some cases within domestic abuse within VORG that are reported by third parties that the victim is never intending on engaging with the police, and we will not have the opportunity from the start where a victim is totally engaged necessarily. Yeah. We do work to try and engage that victim, but there are a difference in profile with that.
Would this cover a scenario where not you've referenced a third party reporting, but perhaps a victim has come forward with a domestic abuse complaint, dealing with a crime of domestic abuse? As part of that investigation, officers are required to record things like previous rapes.
Yep.
That will give you potentially 3 more offences.
Yes.
And the victim says, I just want you to deal with this. I don't want to go through the trauma of going through that. You asked me about it, but that's another thing. Yeah. That would appear within this as 3, in my scenario, 3 instances of a victim not engaging, despite the fact they may actually be fully engaged with another investigation.
Yeah, absolutely would. Yes. Yeah. So in that case, that crime, that investigation would need to be recorded with a code 16, for example, which is that the victim has disengaged. That's the definition of that code, and that would cover those cases as well.
Okay, thank you.
Vulnerable children and adults, we track the profile of capturing the voice of the child in TVP. So that's been on a good upward trajectory all the way through, which is good to see. One that just needs constant rhythm and constant reminders. But what this is trying to track essentially is where a officer comes into contact with a situation. If there are children involved, we are capturing the voice of those children where that is possible. It's not possible in every case, but we need to be considering it and recording it. So that's a regular rhythm that we track. And the 1 and 2 charts there are a profile of the children that we are most concerned about within the Thames Valley that may be coming into harm. And we've got a really mature approach to that now, that in our MASHs, our multi-agency safeguarding hubs, we identify that cohort of children, we track them, we understand what their pattern of contact with the police looks like, and then they are passed to our harm reduction units to actively manage and monitor all the way through. Within a PG context again, but also within our local performance meetings, we have much more detailed information about each child, how they are being managed, how long they're being managed for. That's obviously not appropriate for a public forum, but that's a well-established now route that we take with those children that we have most concern about.
And sorry, Roger.
What's the difference between re-entry and repeat?
So repeat and re-entry is where if you are repeat, it means that you are coming into contact with the police consistently and you are staying within that top profile of concerning children. Re-entry is where you have been within that profile, at a past point. You have dropped off that profile, and we can see why that might be. There's been a gap, so your contact with the police has lessened. We've done some proactive work to manage you, safeguard you, and then you've re-entered for whatever reason.
No, well, that was going to be one of my questions actually, but I mean, it's an incredibly difficult area to deal with. It's not just down to policing, as we know, to resolve these. Yeah, I mean, there is a very pressing message in some ways that there's 1,200 children who are repeat offenders. I was thinking a bit differently though. Actually, it does show what we all know, because it's saying about the adult cohort, that actually of those offences being committed by children, it's actually a relatively small number of all of the children who are committing all of the offences. Does that make sense? Because they are repeated. The new entrants into the system are relatively small in each period of it.
Very much so. Yes, you are dealing with a smaller cohort. The other thing to note is when we are showing that, what you're not seeing is just offending by these children. You are also seeing where they are coming into contact with police for various different reasons. They may witness domestic abuse. They may go missing. So we consider a really broad range of factors to understand the vulnerability that child might be facing and their pattern of interaction with the police.
I think because we've taken action, the conversation with Rachel, just having a look at the data, because it fits with the conversation that we've had separately in liaison meetings about how the force deals with those children who come into contact with criminal justice, but might actually pose a greater risk than sometimes is recognised. And I just think it might be worth thinking about what more we might be able to do with other agencies in terms of identifying and capturing that cohort. I mean, there's no easy solutions to it, but I just want to make sure we've had a think for
next slide is again within the vulnerability space. So this looks at our response to fraud, and one, investigating fraud, but also safeguarding potential victims of fraud. So the top profiles look at the profile of fraud investigations that we've got, and our sold profile as well. And we've got a really strong approach to this with our central fraud unit. Again, it's something that we've been recognised by the Home Office for our approach. We've got a really good handle on our fraud cases, and Bruce Renell, who heads up that side of things for Duncan Wynn. We've got a very mature approach. In terms of banking protocol occurrences, what that is tracking is where a bank will have contacted us because they are concerned about activity either within their branch or potentially online at points that somebody with vulnerability is being asked to withdraw significant amounts of money, or has asked individually themselves to have some sort of bank activity that falls outside of what they would normally do. And we track kind of how we attend those. The interesting thing about those is we say 64% of incidents have been attended within 24 hours. There are some that we will never attend, so it's a difficult thing on that, because there are some that are online based that we deal with that in a slightly different way.
Just on that, so there's a case that I came across, someone that raised with me. I'm just waiting for a bit more information to follow up on it. It might just be one of those outliers that is a bad case, but it potentially flagged for me a potential gap. So we talk about this as the banking protocol, when a bank gets in touch. So the instance in question, a gentleman has been taken to a branch of Tesco to withdraw some money from a cash machine, seemingly under some element of duress. Exactly the sort of thing which the banking protocol would pick up if it was a branch of Barclays. Exactly those sorts of things where you'd expect staff to call, and I think would constitute a grade 1 attendance. You've got someone there now. Now, in that case, there wasn't a swift attendance. Probably was within 24 hours, to be fair. But I guess, is there a risk, is there a gap, probably in the control room, on this is just someone from Tesco is calling up? Is it trigger the same process somewhere? Because there's obviously lots of different locations where you could have almost exactly the same scenario. And as our physical banks are significantly less on the high street these days, I think it's been, the performance on this has been really good. I wouldn't want us to lose it because we're a little bit restricted in terms of process.
It's a good question. I think one maybe to take away for Bruce to reflect on, because I suppose there are two things that spring to my mind. One is how it was reported in the first instance, whether those individuals within those institutions that aren't banks understand
know what to say.
and understand what to look out for, and then know what to say in terms of that report. So that's one question. And then the second is, if it is reported without the usual banking protocol routing, what would our response be? Now, my feeling would be that one of our call handlers, if they heard that scenario, would probably approach that in an urgent response, kind of frameworks. They deal with opportunity and risk, in that determination. I can't speak for that individual case and just how it was serviced. But I think that's one that we could ask Bruce about, whether or not there's an expected route for supermarkets and things like that.
So that'd be how we can take it in action plan, because there may be an opportunity for us to do more through my office as well as with the force. So actually, well, if that process works well, and we simply need to be doing more in terms of educating other businesses in terms of what to look out for, but also how to report. And that's a relatively simple action that might improve things.
Yes. Okay, thanks, Kirsty. This looks at our antisocial behaviour. There are a couple of different points on here that we look at our crime profile here, but again we're fairly content with where our crime profile sits here. We've actually further into this year we've seen actually a reduction in our antisocial behaviour, and our ASB levels are fairly low across the country. We actually did some work in the past couple of years to try and increase our ASB recording to make sure that we would definitely getting everything in from the public. I think you probably remember those conversations, Matthew, in previously. We're content with where our level of recording is now, and we're looking for reductions year on year, and we're fairly comfortable with where we are so far.
As you might be aware, this work that my office is doing, along with John Batty's team and local authorities, to try and bring that data together in one place if possible, so that we get a better understanding. Because there's been a real effort made by TPP, I agree, but I still feel that there's quite a lot unreported or underreported. And if that's going into local authorities, if they're dealing with it, that's fine. But there's that risk that people don't report because they don't know who to go to.
This is a newer profile for us. We did talk for the last few years about neighbourhood crime, which is a certain collection of crime groups that the Home Office were driving forces to be really focused on. They've changed that profile slightly in their approach for neighbourhood policing. So they are looking at retail and street crime now within the Safer Streets mission. And this is the profile of outcomes that we are getting against those crime types. So you can see here that we are at 18.1% solve rate. That is above where we were potentially expecting to be in the early parts of the year. And it tracks the similar performance in outcomes that we've seen in other areas. A really strong start to the year for us on that front. And you can see on the right-hand side there, the types of crime that we're talking about there and how much we've improved against last year. The dark blue bars are our outcomes this year against the light blue last year. So a really strong start to the year. This tracks our neighbourhood visibility and visible activity. So you can see there that the neighbourhood guarantee and those stipulations that we outline for the public are in green, most predominantly where they're in a slightly lighter green. They are still almost at 100%. This is tracked really carefully by each area. And what it does is it takes the specific expectations that are set out in the neighbourhood guarantee by the government and make sure that we are abiding by them. Again, this is something that John Batty's had a lot of conversation in the Home Office, because we were a trailblazer in how we record this and how we make sure that we are tracking it regularly. And then I think this is the last slide, our stop and search and use of powers profile. Stop and search outcome rate remains very, very strong. We've been very strong in that area for a long time in TDP. And you can see there that the volume of stop and search has gone up in the first 3 months of this year. And then in terms of use of powers and our recording of use of powers forms, again, we are on an upward trajectory. You see the light blue line there is on the up. And the volumes are remaining fairly stable in that space. So nothing of concern in those profiles.
Good stuff. Thank you very much, Matty. No more questions. Thank you already over time for your previous meeting. But it was your item, so I made. Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much. Indeed, I'll let you go. We'll do. Jason, can I come to you to do the what are on the agenda items 5 to 6, which we'll take as one, basically your operational highlights that you want to raise with us.
Yeah, I think I just focus on the transformation portfolio up today. The operational stuff, very much nothing by exception, and clearly we've been through performance in some detail with Matty there. So in terms of police force fit for the future, I'll focus briefly on key achievements in the last 12 months, current activity, and looking ahead, what our priorities will be. So some highlights. Now our fourth change programme, the new restructure of 11/12 local policing areas into local command units, is now fully embedded, and the project has finished. So it's definitely created greater flexibility, improved consistency, and efficiencies worth of 400 police officers in terms of the amount of savings we've been able to make from that. We've delivered £27 million worth of savings over the last 3 years, whilst, as Matty has said, maintaining operational performance and investing in future capability. And the good news is, despite the fact that we've taken the equivalent of 400 officers out, performance in the key areas that matter most to the public, which are answering the phone, responding to incidents, solving crime, all those 3 areas are have improved during this time and continue to improve. So we are in a good place there. We continue to invest a lot in robotic process automation. We now have 37,000 operational hours of productivity delivered through those robots, and you're aware, Matthew, of the work ongoing, a proposal to either increase the size of our team by between 50 and 100% because of further opportunities to make savings and manage our demand more effectively. We're making good progress in relation to our forensics improvement programme, and last week you were aware we were giving the keys to our new forensic building in Bicester, £40 million worth of investment there to put us in a good place to manage the changing nature of forensics, particularly in the digital space. So we are invested in this area, as you're aware, to improve the timeliness of examination devices to get cases to court quicker. We are, as you're aware, investing in the AI space through our Bobby app. Police AI went live in May, which is a new national body which will affect oversee for the whole of the police service cases where the police service can use AI most effectively and test those cases before forces roll them out. We are the operational partner with Police AI, which will sit in the Thames Valley, and we were the force that really helped support getting Police AI up and running, and momentum does continue. We see in the coming weeks and months test cases that we'll be going live with around using AI more proactively in TVP as well. We continue to have a very strong approach to innovation in TVP, and we're well known for having an innovative approach and trying new things. So Ben Snuggs, my deputy, he chairs the National Science and Innovation Board. So we're able to, through Ben's chairing of that, any good practice in the forces, bring them into TVP early. And we also then the regional lead for innovation, and we for the forces in the southeast as well. In terms of current activity, the three key areas we're working on is one, transforming the investigation journey to give a better service to victims, but also solve more crime, building on in forensics intelligence and investigate capability, like I said, to deliver better outcomes. Secondly, future communities, and Matthew, you'll be aware of that. We're scanning ahead and planning, particularly in Thames Valley, the changing increase in population, where the population, just for Oxfordshire, for example, is increasing at 50% higher than the national average increases to population, and that involves greater investment in technology. So our rapid video response work through domestic abuse has gone really well. So victims of DA in certain categories can see a police officer on a screen within a minute of calling the police. We're now in the process of looking to extend that further to all crime types. And that, again, that will assist our response times, because some victims do not need an officer at their home addresses, and if it takes 20, 30, 40 minutes to get there, actually we can deal with more crime through Teams meetings like this. So we're investing in that area. And finally, investing in our workforce for the future through our new people strategy as well. So in terms of looking ahead, key priorities for the next three months, Like I've said, expanding the use of automation, AI, and digital technology to improve our productivity. Building on the success of the rapid video response, like I've said, the next thing is called enhanced video response, which is effectively the same as rapid video response, but other crime types other than DA as well. And finally, continuing to develop the Bobby app and a growing range of AI agents in our control room to provide a better service at that front end. As you're aware, 77% of people who contact that initial contact give feedback that it's good, 77%. I would like to do that the same as officer attendance. That is kind of the aim, the vision. What we're all trying to get to is being able to have contact with the public, have really high levels of public satisfaction, where we don't need to send an officer. That's where that is costly and it takes time. And again, if we free more officers up, they can get quicker at attending those 999 instance, but also more time to investigate crime and hopefully include our solved crime rate as well. So effectively, those are the areas that we are focusing on in the next period.
Okay, thank you, Jason. Just one question for you, which is not one you can necessarily answer now because there's a lot of speculation in it. But you started off talking about the merger of the LPAs, local policing areas, into LCUs.
Yes.
Mind you, just to confuse the jargon even further, what the government are now talking about is LPAs, but they mean the same thing, I think, as our LCU. What's the command unit? And we obviously haven't seen what Lord Hogan Howe comes out with as yet, but all the talk I've heard, and it was reiterated at a meeting with Louisa Ralph and civil servants in London on the Wednesday of last week, is they are looking at upper tier local authorities as the geography for an LPA. That would mean that having saved millions of pounds going from 12 LPAs to 5 LCUs, TVP could effectively be forced into having 10 LPAs under the new local government model. Now, I think that would be a retrograde step, and I think that many of our local authorities geographically would be incredibly small, and that is part of the problem with the old LPA model. But what's your take on that? I mean, that would presumably set the force back millions and potentially have some operational impact as well.
Yeah, I think there's a bigger issue here with there is simply, as you're aware, in real terms, the policing budget reduces year by year because of inflationary pressures and a lack of investment. And to be fair, choices made by government where to invest in priority areas, and policing is not a priority area at the moment. In that context, when we haven't got enough resources to meet the demand coming through our front door from the public, we need as much flexibility as we can. And the great thing about the LCU model, bigger teams with a single chief superintendent who on a day-to-day basis can move those resources around to meet that day-to-day demand. If we have to move from 5 to 10, it takes away some of that flexibility, and I do worry it would have an impact on our performance with building in more barriers that we've just taken away. And as you say, it would cost certainly millions and millions to, change is difficult and complex in an organisation as large as TVP. It would cost a significant amount of money to do that. And I'm not convinced there would be any benefit to the public. Like I've said, there's like to be delays certainly in responding to instance, moving into that model. And certainly our LCUs are currently led by chief superintendents. We have 5. We will not be having 10 local policing areas led by chief superintendents because we simply do not have the money. So I do worry a little bit about that. And I did feel the more the centre set demands you have to deliver your service in a particular way, it gives less flexibility locally, more difficult to meet those government targets.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, lovely. That's helpful. I think it's just something we need to continue to review. We've got our meeting with local authorities in September now to reflect on that. Okay, thank you. We'll move on to Ali, if we may, please.
Yeah, I can do it if you'd rather. Yeah,
that's great. I think the first thing I'll just say before you probably have some questions about it, but we we are still trying to work through how we present this in the best way. We present it to GIAC, we present it here, and so there may not be some comparator numbers that you've got in here that we do have and are collating. So I suppose that's the one caveat. But with our audits, so these are the joint internal audits that come from the likes of Neil and Amy. We are focusing our efforts on the priority one actions. We've done loads of work to reduce those. I think we're still doing some work around prioritisation of which ones we might want to focus our effort on as well. But this one is around the overview of who's got what. And this is the table on the right-hand side that I'm saying it's not as mature as Matty's data that you've got, but we will have more data that's going to be in there as time goes on. And as I say, we are prioritising our priority one actions. It actually looks like we haven't got any from our last quarter. We have got some, we just didn't pull that data in that last quarter.
Yep.
And this information is about our AFIs and recommendations. This does not have our peel inspection data in. So on the left-hand side, we've got the bar chart with our previous peel AFIs and recommendations. We now have 14 new ones. So all of those have been superseded from our previous one. So that will show up in the next PAM.
So we'll move on from this reasonably quickly because you say it's been taken over, just to understand. So at the moment there are just 17 areas for improvement. They will all effectively be superseded.
Yes.
The new number being 14.
Yes, correct. Yeah. And then on the right-hand side, those are all our other ones that we have from thematic national inspections or spotlight reports.
Lovely. So our next thing is October. So the next one will reflect the latest report.
Yeah.
So we'll obviously have conversations behind the scenes about the latest bill for that, because I'll need to do my response for HMRC. Okay, lovely.
Matthew, can I just come into that point there? Ali, does that include that letter I'm going to be sending to Roy Wiltshire this week? With the AFIs?
That letter is not specifically relating to AFIs. It's some of the other narrative that's within some of those. So, yeah.
Yeah, just on that, Matthew, I'll be writing to HMIC this week from the last peel inspection. There's certain areas of it, they've commentary in there, which I'm going to be very, very explicit around areas which we will not be pursuing, shall we say, just because it's not a priority for us. And we'll be focused on those areas which I think will make the most difference to improving our service to the public. An example would be, they've said in there that we need to have a project manager for every change program and process that we have in TVP. We simply haven't the resources for that. And I think if I came to you and said, can I have another 10 project managers, please, Matthew? You'd say, actually, you'd rather me spend another 10 neighbourhood officers, shall we say, rather than on people we don't necessarily need. So that's an example of an area we're saying, you've made this observation in the report. We won't be actioning this because of other priority areas that will impact the public much more.
Yeah, no, that I totally agree with. We'll have that on the agenda for our next liaison anyway, so we can reflect some of those issues in my full response.
We're working behind the scenes with Ali to work out the formal response and anything that needs to be included in.
Lovely stuff. Great, thank you, Ali. Right, Tim, we're over to you for the finance items. Sorry for making you wait so long. So we've got all the finance items together then. So we've got budget position update, and then we've got scheme delegations, which is nice and simple, and treasury management, which is under Martin, that you might have.
I think mine's just given a written update on that.
Okay, over to you then for item 4, please.
Kirsty, would you be so kind as just to pull up page 6 of the agenda? So it's mainly a verbal update of the table on page 6, which might help. Thank you. Right, so so it's still early in the financial year, but we have now got the results for the first quarter. And sorry, if you just scroll down to the table there. Yeah, thank you. So the position at the end of the first quarter is that we are projecting a 1.1 million underspend. As I said earlier in the year, still plenty of risks, also opportunities. So to explain that forecast result then, essentially what's driving that is the pay area for both police officers and police staff. So dealing with the officers first, actually as at the end of June, we were actually over our budgeted establishment by 24 officers. But we also had a corresponding, we were under establishment on our protection grant, which is obviously separately funded. So that is, we do have plans in place where that 24 will go down, but we will also increase the protection group. So it is a bit of a sort of counterintuitive that we are kind of over at the moment, yet we are projecting an underspend. So the reason for that is essentially at the moment with the average cost of an officer is slightly lower than when we budgeted. So obviously when we set the budget, it's based on establishment and the rank mix, but depending on sort of length of service, that there is some sort of fluctuation in that. So at the moment, with the current average cost of an officer is about £210 lower than when we set the budget towards the end of last year. Now, obviously, that doesn't sound a lot, but when you extrapolate that's close to £1 million. So that's the primary reason at the moment where we're underspending.
Just because it's relevant to some of the other comments about Home Office funding, broadly speaking, what's the average figure that you're looking at for the average cost per officer?
I don't know if that's hand actually, sorry. That's something
from memory, around 60,000-65,000 is, as obviously my 5,000 range is vastly bigger than your £200 variance, but I think it's in that ballpark.
So get that for you. So police staff then, we're also underspending. So this one's a bit more straightforward to explain, hopefully. This is essentially just the number of vacancies we've got, which is higher than the budgeted adjustment we do every year. We obviously do budget for a number of vacancies, but we are seeing more at the moment. We've seen a bit of an uptick, actually, a bit of a trend since right about midpoint of last year. And one of the reasons for that is it's linked to our savings activity. So at the moment, we're obviously looking for efficiencies, and many departments of the force do have targets to reduce spend on police staff. So what we're finding is some departments, obviously in preparation for this, are kind of holding vacancies where they kind of arise until they actually know what they've got, what their sort of firm plans are for their savings. So that's the main kind of factor there. Talking of the savings work, we did. So last year was the first year of our efficiencies programme, and we did see quite high redundancy costs last year associated with those savings. So we have now put provision in for this year based on a sort of similar level. So that's where you're seeing that increase in other employee costs, the main factor for that. Obviously, the two things are potentially related, so that is something we'll kind of monitor closely, whether that provision is necessary this year. It could be that if we're holding more vacancies, we don't have high redundancy costs, but the plans for the year 2 savings are being sort of firmed up over the next few months. So that's something we'll kind of watch closely. So essentially those two, the police staff and the police officer, underspends on pay are kind of offsetting some small overspends you can see there in some of the non-pay, where we do still see a few challenges. So transport, for example, is obviously an area we've targeted savings over the last couple of years, particularly around hire car usage. But we've seen an increase this year, which is almost entirely related to the HMRC uplift of the mileage rate to 45p to 55p, which would project about £500,000 extra cost for TVP. So obviously that is essentially inflation, because it's obviously the inflation we're all seeing due to the external factors. So in summary, that's probably the position at the moment. Then, as I said, still early in the year, but looking underspent at the moment.
Okay, lovely. Thank you. I mean, I don't think there's any other particular questions for you. So I guess my observation and the reason why I was asking about the cost per officer is the variance we get from the Home Office. So I note with some interest that the public might not entirely agree with the fact that protection group officers are fully funded by the government. So those who are keeping the great and the good safe are fully funded by government. Those who are keeping the rest of us safe are only 40% funded, and we've got to chip in the other 60% locally for those. And also the anti-Semitism grant, though welcome, is a significant sum of money, which seems to have come out of the blue. And frankly, if there's that much money in the Home Office, it would be nice if we just got that in our core grant. And those officers are funded about, I think, 150% of what we would normally expect an officer to cost. So there seems to be some different calculations being used in the Home Office, but that's not a problem for you. Okay, in which case we've got delegated decisions. Which would be nice.
Sorry, there was one other thing I was just going to mention. One of two. So you covered the anti-Semitism grant. So the only other thing was just the pay award there. So we have now received notification that the pay will be 3.5%. But we also received at the same time news that anything above 2.5% we would receive additional funding for. Again, that this is the calculation they use. As we've seen in the past, many things we do kind of lose out a little bit because they use that the funding formula rather than national resource element. But overall, it is positive news because we have budgeted 3%.
Yeah.
So what this means is, following the calculations we've done, that we can afford 3.5% uplift applied to officers, South East allowance and police staff, and we will still see a benefit this year of £800,000.
Yeah.
Also, it has been confirmed funding applies to the next 2 financial years as well. So again, that just provides a bit more certainty in the future years.
That is important to get some certainty. And undoubtedly, that is good news for the force. I wouldn't want to do down. Equally, it's bad news for the people of Thames Valley who have already been taxed to pay for that little bit of a pay rise. We're able to put that money to good use, but arguably we wouldn't have needed to if we'd have known what government's intention was previously. Okay, good stuff. Sorry, anything else from you?
No.
Okay, good stuff. If we can go on to the delegated decisions. It's page 17, I think, is the key one. A relatively short list this time. Nothing on there to raise, just to formally approve those. Thank you very much indeed. The Treasury Management Quarterly Report, we've got an update in writing on that. Not your remit, Tim, but as the Finance Manager, if you want to add anything, or Gillian, if you've got anything else to no? Okay, good.
Thank you.
We will note that report then. Jason, any other business from you?
Nothing from me. Thank you, Matthew.
Good stuff. Lovely. Thank you very much all for your time. Next meeting of this particular group is in October.
Thank you.